Welcome to a new video. In this video, we'll talk about functions in Dart. Let's understand what a function is. In programming, function is a block of code which is designed to perform a specific task. Function help to make our code more readable, maintainable, and reusable. To make this easier to understand, let's look at a built-in function like print function in Dart. This function is designed to print something on the console, right? For instance, print hello world. It will print hello world in the console. We can use this function in many ways throughout our code. The interesting thing is that you can make your own function. For that, at first you have to give a return type. If you don't want to return something from the function, you still have to specify a type. For that, you will use void, which means it will return nothing. Next, you give the function name. Keep in mind to choose a name that reflects the task you want the function to perform. For now, we want to print hello world with this function, so we will name the function hello world. Then we define the arguments. For now, we don't need any, so we'll keep it empty and talk briefly later in this video. Next is the function body, where we write the code that we want the function to execute. In this case, we want to print hello world. So this is the simplest function. Now, how can we use this function? Simply write the name of this function, where you want to call it. Since this function doesn't need any arguments, so we don't have to pass anything. What will happen if I run this program now? It will print hello world. If you understand this very basic function and the structure, let's talk about the return type first. Earlier we wrote void as return type, which means the function will return nothing. But what does that mean? As I mentioned, a function is a block of code designed to perform a task. In our hello world function, its task is to print hello world and nothing else. We don't need anything after executing this function. That's why we use void. But what if we need something after executing a function? Let's say we need a function that multiplies 10 with 10 and returns the result. How do we do that? We'll take two variables of type integer, number 1 and number 2. Then we'll have another integer named result to store the multiplication of these two numbers. But what do we do with this result if we just calculate and store it in this function? The goal of this code block is to perform multiplication and use the result somewhere else, right? So we need to return it. This is where the concept of returning something from a function comes in. How can we do that? It's simple. Since we need the result from this function and it is an integer, the return type of this function will be integer. So we'll write integer instead of voice, like int. Now you will see an error if you don't return something from this function. Since we specified the return type as integer, Dart expects us to return an integer from the function. To do this, we'll write the keyword return followed by the result. Now, whenever you call this function, it will return the result as an integer. We can store this return value in another integer variable. For example, integer result equal the function. This will call the function. It will return the result and store it in the result variable. Let's print it and see the result. Remember, you can return anything from the function based on your need, like string, double, list, map, object, whatever you need. You can make a function return type dynamic. To do that, you can directly write type dynamic or nothing. If we write nothing, by default it will be dynamic. If you are clear about the return type, then we can talk about our next topic, arguments. If not, please watch the previous section again. Let's take it step by step. So what are arguments? I already mentioned a little bit about arguments when we talked about where you will provide them. In simple terms, Arguments are values that you can pass to your function from where you are calling it to make it functional. Let's consider our multiply number function. We are multiplying two numbers, right, in this function. But the problem is you can't change these two numbers from outside of this function or have any control over it. This means it's not fully supporting the definition of a function, right? We can't reuse this function to multiply different numbers. This is where arguments come in to help us. How do they help us? Simple. In the first set of parentheses, write integer number 1 and number 2. Now you'll see an error that says you need two positional arguments. Remember this term, positional arguments. We'll talk more about it later. So we need to pass two arguments to make this function functional. Let's pass 10 and 20. Now number 1 is 10 and number 2 is 20. What will this function return? 200, right? If we call this function again with 5 and 10, it will return 50. This means you can call this function as much as you need with any arguments you want. This is what arguments are and how to use them. Let's talk about the classification of arguments. Mainly there are three types of arguments in Dart: positional arguments, named arguments, and default arguments. What are positional arguments? Let's take another function with the purpose of displaying user data. The return type of the function will be void and we will print the user's information with name and country. The arguments will be string name and string country. Inside the function, it will simply print the name and country. This type of argument is called a positional argument. Why? Because when we call this function, there is no identifier indicating which argument is the name and which one is the country. If we send the country name in the first position, what will happen? Let's see. It will show the name as Bangladesh and country as Rakib. So it's working based on the position of arguments as defined in the function's parentheses. It's confusing, right? When you have more arguments to remember. Then we have named arguments. Named arguments allow you to specify which parameter you are assigning a value to. It makes your function calls more readable. Named arguments are enclosed in curly brackets in the function definition. Let's enclose these arguments with curly brackets. Now it will give an error that the parameter name can't have a value of null. How can we solve that? You can solve this by making these arguments optional or nullable. This means when you call the function, you can pass the arguments or skip them. If we skip them, it will print null, but there will be no error. Another way to solve this is to make it required to pass arguments when you call the function. Simply add required before the arguments. Now you must pass the arguments. An interesting feature of named arguments is that you can pass them with an identifier. For example, for name, you can pass name, then the value, and for country, you can pass country, then the value. Now it doesn't matter which order you send the arguments in. Now, if you want an argument to be optional and don't pass it, it will print null, right? But what if we want a default value? For example, if we don't pass the country name, it should still have a value. Simple. We can assign a default value in the arguments like country equal Bangladesh. Now if we skip the country when calling the function, it will be Bangladesh by default. And if we pass something like USA, it will be USA. But for the positional arguments, optional values don't work the same way. Let's convert it to positional arguments. To make it positional, simply enclose it with square brackets. Now it will print null if not passed. But can we set a default value here? No, we can do that directly. Instead, in the function body, you can assign a value if name or country is null. For example, if name is null, by default it will be user, and if country is null, it will be Bangladesh. But if I pass Rakib and USA, it will be Rakib and USA. We can mix positional, named and default arguments together. For example, let's say we want name to be positional and country to be named and have a default value. How can we do that? Simple, enclose country with curly brackets and set a default value for it. Now we can call the showUserDate function with name as a positional argument and country can be skipped. In this case, it will print the name and the default value for country. We can also pass country as a named argument like country USA. Now it will print Rakib and USA. Based on if function has a name or not, there are two types of function, named and anonymous. Named functions are those that have a specific identifier, like all the functions we have seen in this video so far, with a return type followed by the function name. On the other hand, anonymous functions don't have a specific name and can be used or written wherever needed. They are also known as lambda functions or closures. We can directly write it like type var username equal parenthesis, where we'll pass arguments, then direct the function body ending with a semicolon. So username holding anonymous function, inside the function body it will print the name, simple. Now if we run this program, it will execute the anonymous function and print the name. If we see, it's a type of function, so we can directly write type function here instead of var. So in this video we have learned about functions in Dart, how they work, different ways to use them and why they are useful. We covered things like how to give functions name, how to use them without names, and how to handle different types of information when using functions. Understanding these basics will help you write better and more effective Dart code for your project.